Economic pressures and legalization. Despite the trustees' intentions, economic pressures and settler demands quickly eroded the ban on slavery. Settlers argued that they could not compete with neighboring South Carolina, where enslaved labor fueled economic prosperity. By 1751, slavery was officially legalized in Georgia, and the colony rapidly adopted the plantation model, the growth of slavery and its consequences. Once legalized, the institution of slavery expanded rapidly. By the time of the American Revolution, Georgia's enslaved population had grown to 18,000. The shift to plantation agriculture entrenched a rigid social hierarchy, with a small elite of wealthy planters dominating economic, political, and social life. Enslaved Africans faced brutal conditions, family separation, and the constant threat of violence long-term impact. The introduction of slavery fundamentally altered Georgia's society and economy, aligning it with the rest of the southern colonies and setting the stage for its later role in the Cotton Kingdom and the American Civil War. See settlers, diversity, discontent, and adaptation. A mosaic of settlers. Georgia's early settlers were a diverse group, including English, Scots, German Salzburgers, Jews, and other Europeans. The trustees deliberately sought a balanced mix of men, women, and children to encourage stable family units and community growth. Hardships and discontent. The settlers faced immense hardships: disease, food shortages, labor shortages, and supply delays. The trustees' restrictions on land ownership and the ban on slavery created economic challenges and fueled discontent among settlers, especially those who migrated from other colonies. The malcontents and the end of the trustee era. A group known as the malcontents, wealthy landowners and merchants, lobbied for the repeal of the trustees' policies, arguing they stifled economic potential. By 1752, the trustees surrendered their charter, and Georgia became a royal colony. Restrictions on land and slavery were lifted, and the colony's economy and society began to resemble those of its southern neighbors. Adaptation and transformation. Despite the challenges, the settlers adapted, building communities, establishing trade, and demanding change. The transition from trustee to royal colony marked a turning point, as Georgia shifted from a social experiment to a plantation society. Long-term consequences for Georgia's identity and the American South. The legacy of experimentation and reform. Georgia's founding as a social experiment left a lasting imprint on its identity. The early emphasis on reform, diversity, and utopian ideals contributed to a sense of exceptionalism and a tradition of questioning established norms. This legacy is reflected in Georgia's later history, including its role in the civil rights movement and ongoing debates about social justice. B. The power of myth in identity formation. The debtor's colony myth, though historically inaccurate, has become a powerful part of Georgia's collective memory. As with other foundational myths, it serves to create a narrative of redemption, opportunity, and social mobility, values that continue to shape the state's self-image. The myth's persistence highlights the importance of storytelling in the formation of regional and national identities. C. The shift to plantation society and Southern identity. The legalization of slavery and the rise of the plantation economy brought Georgia into alignment with the broader Southern identity. The colony's social structure became increasingly stratified, dominated by a planter elite and a large enslaved population. This shift had profound consequences for Georgia's role in the American South, contributing to the region's economic development, social hierarchy, and eventual conflict over slavery. D. Cultural diversity and religious pluralism. Georgia's early encouragement of diverse European immigration and religious tolerance, within limits, broadened the cultural base of the South. The pluralism of the early colony foreshadowed the region's later role as a crossroads of cultures, especially as new groups settled and assimilated martial tradition and frontier mentality. Georgia's role as a military buffer and its experience with frontier warfare reinforced the Southern tradition of martial valor, defensive territory, and a sense of embattled identity. These themes would echo in Southern culture through the Civil War and beyond. Comparative perspective, Georgia and other Southern colonies. Georgia's initial divergence from the plantation model and its later convergence highlight the dynamic nature of Southern identity. While Virginia and South Carolina were defined early by aristocracy and slavery, Georgia's experiment with social reform and diversity added complexity to the Southern experience. Over time, the blending of these influences helped shape the region's distinctive culture, marked by both hierarchy and populism, tradition and adaptability for scholarly reflections and the ongoing legacy. The role of founding myths. Scholars emphasize that Georgia's founding myths, especially the Debtors colony narrative, play a central role in the state's identity. These myths, while not always historically accurate, provide a sense of purpose and continuity, linking the past to the present. The enduring influence of early ideals. The early ideals of equality, opportunity, and reform, though ultimately overtaken by economic and social realities, continue to influence Georgia's self-image and its place in the American South. The state's history of experimentation, adaptation, and resilience is a testament to the enduring power of founding visions, even when only partially realized. The importance of inclusive history. Recent scholarship and public history initiatives have sought to broaden the narrative of Georgia's founding, highlighting the experiences of Native Americans, enslaved Africans, and diverse settlers. This more inclusive approach enriches our understanding of the state's history and its ongoing evolution. Conclusion. The legacies of Georgia's founding are complex and multifaceted. The enduring myths of its origin as a debtors colony, the profound impacts on Native Americans, enslaved Africans and settlers, and the long-term consequences for Georgia's identity and the American South all speak to the power of history, both real and imagined, in shaping who we are. Georgia's story is one of hope and hardship, idealism and adaptation, myth and reality. Its unique founding vision, the struggles and transformations of its people, and the ongoing negotiation of its identity offer a window into the broader American experience. As we continue to reflect on Georgia's past, we are reminded that history is not just a record of what was, but a living legacy that shapes our present and our future. The enduring myths of Georgia's origin as a debtors colony. The birth of a myth. The story of Georgia as a debtors colony is one of the most persistent and colorful in American history. It conjures images of English debtors, released from prison and shipped across the Atlantic to start anew in a land of opportunity. This narrative, repeated in textbooks, popular histories, and even tourism brochures, has become a foundational myth of Georgia's identity. But how did this myth arise, and what does the historical record actually show? Oglethorpe, the trustees, and the real founding vision. James Oglethorpe, a British member of Parliament and social reformer, was deeply moved by the plight of debtors languishing in English prisons. His advocacy for prison reform and his role in founding Georgia led to the widespread belief that the colony was established as a refuge for debtors. The trustees' promotional materials and early public discussions further fueled this association. However, the reality was more nuanced. The trustees' actual policy was to help the worthy poor, impoverished but skilled individuals who could contribute to the colony's success. While the idea of resettling debtors was present in early discussions, very few actual debtors were sent to Georgia. Most settlers were not released from prison, but rather selected for their industriousness and potential. The evolution and persistence of the myth. The debtors colony narrative gained traction in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when American school textbooks and popular history simplified Georgia's founding story. The image of a penal colony, settled by men released from English prisons, became entrenched in the public imagination. Even as historians began to challenge this myth, it persisted due to its narrative appeal and symbolic resonance. The story of redemption, new beginnings, and the American dream. Modern scholarship and the real demographics. Recent scholarship has clarified that while many early Georgia settlers were poor and some were in debt, very few were actually imprisoned debtors. The trustees were careful to select useful, in-want, and well-recommended individuals, often requiring proof that applicants were not fleeing creditors or abandoning families. The majority of settlers were English, Scottish, German Protestants, notably the Salzburgers, Jews, and other Europeans seeking opportunity and religious freedom. Key takeaway: Georgia was not founded as a penal colony for debtors, but as a philanthropic experiment for the poor and unemployed. The debtors' colony myth, though persistent, is largely a product of historical misunderstanding and narrative simplification too. The impact on Native Americans, enslaved Africans, and settlers, Native Americans, dispossession and disruption, early relations and diplomacy. Before European colonization, the area now known as Georgia was home to complex indigenous societies, including the Creek, Muskogee, Cherokee, and Yamacraw. The founding of Georgia brought an influx of settlers, leading to increasing pressure on native lands. Oglethorpe initially sought peaceful relations, negotiating land cessions with the Creek and establishing a cooperative relationship with Tomochichi and the Yamacraw, which allowed the English to establish Savannah land loss and forced removal. Despite early diplomacy, the expansion of the colony led to the steady encroachment on Native American territory. The Creek and Cherokee, in particular, faced increasing land loss as settlers moved inland. The discovery of gold in northern Georgia and the growth of the plantation economy accelerated dispossession. By the 19th century, federal and state policies culminated in the forced removal of the Creek and Cherokee, most infamously through the Trail of Tears cultural disruption and legacy. The founding of Georgia disrupted indigenous societies through land loss, population displacement, and cultural change. Despite these challenges, the Creek and Cherokee have maintained cultural connections to Georgia, and their histories are increasingly recognized and preserved in the state. Enslaved Africans, from prohibition to plantation. The trustees' ban on slavery. One of the most distinctive features of Georgia's founding was the trustees' prohibition of slavery. Oglethorpe and the trustees believed that banning slavery would encourage the settlement of English and Christian people and prevent the rise of a plantation aristocracy. The goal was to create a society of smallholding farmers, free from the social and economic inequalities of the plantation South.